So today what I'll be talking about is the entire feedback loop mechanism of the kidney. Okay, so in this I'm trying to explain a concept which although is pretty simple, but something like which would be interrelated to your drugs in the kidney, as well as your electrolyte balance. Everything is related. So what I'm going to be talking about is two feedback mechanisms. Is one we have is the tubulo glomerular feedback loop. Okay, and the second part is a thing which most of the students are very well versed with, is the RAS, which is your renin angiotensin aldosterone system. Is there now? So but obviously as you know, like in the body everything has a purpose. So similarly, now why these two systems are devised by the body is because of this. So we have a glomerulus, and then you have the PCT, which is your proximal convoluted tubule. Then you have your loop of Henle. Then you have thin ascending loop. Then you have thick ascending loop of Henle. Then you have the descending limb. You have the DCT, and then you have the cortical and the medullary collecting duct. Okay, so these are the parts. Now what happens is, as this is a very fragile system, if there is more of blood flow passing through the glomerulus, which is the tuft formed by the afferent and the efferent arteriole inside the Bowman's capsule. So if that tuft has either high blood flow or has a high blood pressure, okay, these things, or it has a low blood flow or a low blood pressure, both of these would lead to a damage of this entire nephron system. Okay, a high blood flow or high blood pressure would lead to a pressure damage, while low blood flow and low blood pressure would lead to an ischemic damage. So that's why these two systems basically try maintaining a balance between a low flow and a high flow, so that the pressure is not too high for the nephron to handle, nor is it too low that it leads to an ischemia. Okay, so what is the tubuloglomerular feedback loop? So before going to that, you need to know another concept, which is your juxtaglomerular apparatus. Now what is juxtaglomerular apparatus? Now this, as I mentioned over here, this is a linear presentation of a nephron. So this is not how the nephron is in your kidney. So the nephron is located in the way is that the distal convoluted tubule would be coming, okay, it would be looping in between. Okay, so this is the way how it comes. Okay, so if you have your Bowman's capsule over here, okay, so you have your proximal convoluted tubule, then you have your loop of Henle going down, going up, and then you have the DCT being formed. Okay, so so here you have your afferent arteriole, you have your efferent arteriole, and then you have the glomerulus. Now this apparatus, which is so what we can do is, I think it will be much more beneficial for you guys to, if I make it in a better or a different color. Okay, so I think it would be well appreciated in that way. So let's do it. So let's make the afferent and the efferent arteriole in the, okay, so you have your afferent and efferent arteriole. So this is your efferent arteriole, you have your entire glomerulus. This is, so here it is going inside, okay, here it is coming outside, which is your efferent. Similarly, here you would have is the distal convoluted tubule. So I'll move like this somewhere. Okay, this is a diagrammatic representation to tell you like how it happens. So as you know, so this is your proximal, this is your afferent, this is your efferent arteriole. Okay, so what happens is there is a special system which is known as the juxtaglomerular apparatus. Now what happens is, so what we're going to do is this area I'm going to broaden it up over here and show you. Okay, okay. So what is basically happening is you have so this would be your distal convoluted tubule cross section. Okay, then you would have your afferent and efferent arteriole, as I mentioned over here. So here would be your afferent arteriole, correct? Okay, and then you have your efferent arteriole, and they form the tuft, which is your glomerulus. Now as you know that the vessel is lined by the endothelial cells. Okay, now so in this area, this particular area, what is happening is the endothelial cells become a bit more specialized, and these specialized endothelial cells will be known as the juxtaglomerular cells or the granular cells. So what we know is this is the specialized cells, okay, which is outside. So this is a slide built up outside. Okay, these specialized endothelial cells are known as the juxtaglomerular cells, also known as the granular cells. Okay, now second component which we have here is the cells which is lining the tubule. So as you know, it would be lined by our columnar epithelium. So now this columnar epithelium in the area which is facing towards the afferent arteriole, these are specialized cells. Okay, these become specialized cells because they would be sensing the sodium chloride which is present in the tubular fluid. Okay, so these specialized cells which is facing towards the afferent arteriole, these specialized cells would be known as the macula densa. Okay, these are the macula densa cells, and along with this we also have another component which is your mesangial cells. Now, okay, so these are mesangial cells. Okay, mesangial cells are basically have a macrophage-like action inside the glomerulus, and these are outside the glomerulus, therefore known as extraglomerular mesangial cells. Now, this entire three-component part, okay, is this entire three components together is known as the juxtaglomerular apparatus. So you have this three components is known as the juxtaglomerular apparatus. Okay, so juxtaglomerular apparatus is made up of three. One is the macula densa, the other is the extraglomerular mesangial cells, and the third one which we saw over here is the JJ cells. Okay, now what happens is, what are the functions? So macula densa function is that it senses the sodium chloride concentration which is present in the tubular fluid which is coming in the distal convoluted tubule. Now extraglomerular mesangial cells as such, it just acts as a binding or a matrix or a movement pathway. Okay, as such it doesn't really have much function, at least not discovered yet. And then you have the JG cells. Now the JG cells is basically responsible for secretion of renin. Okay, so what does the tubulo-glomerular feedback loop means? So what it actually means is that the distal part of the nephron, okay, the distal part of the nephron, which is your distal convoluted tubule, will sense how is the filtered fluid based on its composition, based on the content. It will then assess with the help of macula densa cells and send a feedback, and it sends the feedback through renin. Okay, the renin will go and then influence in various manner, which is your RAS system. The second part is, if it has a lower sodium chloride, then it moves in a different manner, but ultimately it would be affecting the glomerulus in some way or the other. Okay, so let's see what is the tubular glomerular feedback loop. So we have tubular glomerular feedback loop. Okay, so in this you have two things would be there, but obvious there are two options, but obvious if the sodium chloride in the tubular fluid would be low. In second is if the macula densa senses the sodium chloride in the tubular fluid is on a higher side. Okay, when would the sodium chloride in the tubular fluid would be high? You can safely assume is that the blood flowing through the glomerulus is more, so more fluid is being filtered and more amount of sodium chloride is reaching up to the tubular, the DCT level. So this is, you can safely assume this as high renal blood flow happening. Okay, so if the blood flow in the glomerulus is on a higher side, so the purpose of tubular glomerular feedback loop is to lower it at a point where it does not affect. Okay, so if it senses above to a certain extent the sodium chloride, what it does is the excess of the sodium chloride. Now as you know that the tubular cells DCT principal function is it has a sodium potassium 2 chloride uptake co-transporter. Now I'll just tell you a brief thing about this co-transporter. So if this is the luminal side which is opening, and then this is the basal side, okay, where you have other cells. Okay, this is the basal side of the cells and this is the tubular cell inside. So on the luminal side you would have the sodium potassium 2 chloride co-transporter, and on the basal is but obviously lamina, so it's never the basal side, but you have the basolateral sides, you would have the sodium potassium ATPases. Okay, so what is the purpose of these two transport system is, but obvious is lumen where the fluid would be there, it will be co-transporting, so it will take up three things. Okay, it will take up the sodium, it will take up the chloride, and it will take up the potassium part of it. Now the purpose of sodium potassium ATPase is to pump out sodium outside the cell and to pump in instant the potassium inside the cell. That's the principal function. So what happens over here is that as there is very limited amount of sodium potassium ATPase which is present in the basolateral surface, so although the concentration present in the luminal fluid would be on a higher side when you have a high concentration, correct? So if there is more sodium chloride in the lumen, okay, so the cells will be uptaking the sodium chloride more, correct? So if there is increased uptake of sodium chloride by the DCT cells. Okay, so as the DCT cells, which is your distal convoluted tubule, which is also a very proximal part of it, where in the macula densa, these take up more of sodium chloride. Now this would increase the osmolarity of the cell, but obvious. Okay, but what happens is in normal the sodium which is uptaken is thrown out of the cell by the sodium potassium ATPase which is present in the basolateral surface. Now as the amount of sodium chloride which is being taken up by the cell does not equate to the amount of sodium which is thrown out because of limited number of sodium potassium ATPases, so what will happen is the sodium chloride starts accumulating in the cell. Okay, now once the sodium chloride gets starts accumulating in this area, but obvious by sodium will absorb, will direct the water flow inside the cell and lead to cell swelling. Okay, once the cell swells, it activates the stretch. Okay, it activates the stretch maxi and ion channel. Okay, due to which this ATPase is thrown out of the cell. Okay, now this ATP which is thrown out of the cell gets converted into adenosine. Okay, but obviously that's a very common thing because ATP is your adenosine triphosphate, so this triphosphate part is removed, so you have the adenosine remaining. Now this adenosine will go and act on the arterioles. Okay, now it acts very selectively on the arterioles because it want to maintain or reduce the blood flow but not cause ischemia to that extent. So it will affect the arterioles in a manner that the blood flow is reduced. So it acts on the afferent arteriole as well as the efferent arteriole. So in the afferent arteriole it will cause vasoconstriction. Okay, and in the efferent arteriole it causes vasodilatation. So because of vasoconstriction, the amount of blood flowing inside the glomerulus would be reduced, and vasodilatation will maintain the GFR. Okay, because allowing the less amount of blood still remaining in the glomerulus. Okay, so this is the feedback loop when you have a high sodium chloride, which is equivalent to a high renal blood flow. Okay, so when you have a low sodium chloride, it would be almost equivalent to a low renal blood flow or through the glomerulus. So what it needs to do basically is activate the RAS system so that more water and salt is getting absorbed again. So what the sodium chloride is sensed by the macula densa cells. The macula densa will then releases PGE2. Okay, now what will happen is this PGE2 will go and act on the EP2 and EP4 receptors. Okay, now these receptors on the which are present on the JJ cells, okay, juxtaglomerular cells, and will cause the release of renin. Okay, once it causes the release of renin, this will activate the RAS system. Okay, I hope this is clear. Okay, so it's very simple. As you have a low sodium chloride, very equivalent to a low renal blood flow, to avoid the damage caused by ischemia, what it will do is everything is starting with the macula densa, either with a high sodium chloride or low sodium chloride. So a low sodium chloride equivalent to a low renal blood flow or blood flow through the glomerulus, it needs to increase by how, if you can think that the end result, it needs to activate the renin-angiotensin system. How it does this is by releasing prostaglandin E2, which will go and act on the JG cells to release the renin. Okay, the second part which you can remember is the sodium chloride. If it's high, it's almost equivalent to a high glomerular blood flow. It needs to reduce it. How can it reduce? Is by influencing the arteriole. So the end starting is from macula densa and the end has to be at the arteriole to reduce the blood flow. How it does that is by releasing of the ATP, which gets converted into adenosine. This adenosine will then act on the arteriole, so you can remember it is AA. Okay, and this adenosine will act on the arterioles also acts selectively. So on the afferent arteriole causes vasoconstriction, so the blood flow reduces. However, efferent, it will maintain the vasodilatation so that the GFR gets maintained. It does not really lead to an ischemia. Okay, so I think it's pretty clear and it's very simple how the entire tubuloglomerular feedback loop works. So next what I'm going to talk about is the RAS system. Okay, now what is RAS? Is your renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. This was getting activated by renin when there is a low sodium chloride. Okay, so what happens in the RAS system is, as you know, so whenever in the body you have a low blood pressure, there are two systems which gets activated. One, it is taken up by the baroreceptors. Okay, it is sensed by the baroreceptors present in the carotid sinus. Okay, and it will increase the sympathetic activity. Which will lead to vasoconstriction. Okay, complete vasoconstriction. The second part is low blood pressure. When it happens in the kidney level, it will be sensed by your macula densa cells as a low sodium chloride. Okay, and it will activate the GG cells to release renin. Okay, this is very simple till now. Now what happens once the renin is released? So what renin does is, there is a plasma protein which is produced at the level of liver. Okay, so liver, as you know, it's the center for all the protein synthesis. So liver produces a plasma protein which is known as angiotensinogen. Okay, angiotensinogen. Okay, now this plasma protein produced in the liver is cleaved by renin, okay, to produce angiotensin 1. Okay, now this is a 10 amino acid long peptide. Okay, now what happens when you have angiotensin 1? Now this angiotensin 1 needs to be converted, is then converted into angiotensin 2 by removing 2 amino acids, so it becomes a 8 amino acid long peptide. Okay, and this conversion is done by angiotensin converting enzyme. So as you can see, there are two things happening in this entire reaction. One is renin, which is a hormone, okay, and second is ACE, which is angiotensin converting enzyme. So this is an enzyme. What is the difference between enzyme and hormone? Is the hormone act as messenger, so it is produced in some part of the body and carried through the blood to some other location in the body, whereas enzyme is always located in the place where it is produced. It's always stays over there and causes local reactions, so it can act as an accelerator, metabolism, hydrolysis, conversions. Basically it acts like a stimulant or a suppressant, but your hormones basically will be leading to it acts as a messenger, a secondary messenger, primary messenger. Okay, so now this angiotensin 2 which is produced, it will act on the following organs. So one, it acts on the vessels. Okay, so it acts on the vessels. Second, it will act on the adrenal gland. Okay, third, it will act on the pituitary. Okay, and fourth, it will act on the hypothalamus. Okay, now vessels, what it will do in the renal vessels, renal and systemic vessels would be different. In renal vessels, basically it will try doing a vasoconstriction, okay, to increase the volume. Okay, so in renal vessels, what it will do is it will cause afferent vasodilatation and efferent vasoconstriction. As such, there is not a vasodilatation, it's a relative thing. So the efferent vasoconstriction would be more than the afferent one, so it looks like the afferent is vasodilated. Okay, and systemically the entire, all the body vessels would undergo vasoconstriction. Okay, the next part is your adrenal, so it will go and act on the adrenal cortex, okay, in the zona glomerulosa, and cause the release on aldosterone. Okay, this is another very important hormone. Okay, now in pituitary, we'll talk about aldosterone later. In the pituitary, it acts on the posterior part and causes the release of ADH. Okay, and in hypothalamus, it increases water thirst, increases salt intake. Now what this ADH and aldosterone does, now aldosterone will go and act on the distal part of the distal convoluted tubule, and the ADH will basically act on the The cortical part of the collecting tubule. Okay, so aldosterone is principally responsible for reabsorption of sodium and a passive absorption of water along with the reabsorption of sodium and secretion of potassium along with it. Then ADH is basically responsible for free flow absorption of water. This occurs through channels which are known as aquaporins present in the cortical collecting tubule. Okay, so I think this is pretty clear. Now, how does it play a role in our drugs? Is we have drugs acting at various levels. So we have one which is okay, so let me just make it in some other color which is pretty prominent. Okay, so one we have is the drug which is acting at the renin part, which is direct renin inhibitors. Okay, this is just one which is aliskiren. Okay, this is a direct renin inhibitor. This is principally used in hypertension. Then you have ACE. Okay, so here we have is ACE inhibitors. Okay, which is a pretty common drug used in various things. So it could be used for diuresis. It could be used in case of congestive heart failures. In case of any hypervolemic states, we are using ACE inhibitors. Also for hypertension, we are using it. So ACE inhibitors act principally on this enzymes, which is ACE enzyme, which prevents the conversion of angiotensin 1 into 2. The only drawback which happens is this ACE enzyme, which is angiotensin converting enzyme, also is responsible for the breakdown of bradykinin in the bradykinin kallikrein pathway. So when you have ACE inhibitor, the bradykinin does not get broken down, due to which you have the cough side effect and the rash side effects due to ACE inhibitors. Okay, and the third part is your okay, this is what is this is the place where the angiotensin 2 will act. Okay, so these are the various organs which has angiotensin receptors. So we have angiotensin, third drug is angiotensin receptor blocker, not a angiotensin 2 blocker. Okay, angiotensin receptor blocker. Okay, examples would be your losartan, okay, irbesartan, candesartan, irbesartan. Okay, so these are all the sartans would be your angiotensin receptor blockers. Okay, so what is the benefit of angiotensin receptor blocker would be one, that it does not affect the bradykinin breakdown, because the ACE enzyme is not affected over here, so cough is not there. So it's definitely an alternative in case of ACE induced cough, where you need to switch the patient, go for an angiotensin receptor blocker. Okay, I think that's it. So this is a very short one which can be used in like various things. These two feedback loop mechanisms are very important, and I hope you guys understand it pretty clearly now. The concept is very clear. Okay, bye.